Fire engulfed the enemy's strategic infrastructure deep in the rear. On the evening of the 26th of June, strike drones from Ukraine's defense intelligence attacked the 1061st Material and Technical Support Center of the Russian Armed Forces in Bryansk, hitting fuel depots and rocket fuel storage, according to intelligence sources cited by Unian. Bryansk is serving as a launchpad for Russian missile and drone attacks into Ukraine. In June 2025, Ukrainian forces intensified operations against Russian military infrastructure in Bryansk Oblast, including high-profile attacks on missile bases, airfields and railway infrastructure, resulting in the destruction of Iskander missile launchers, helicopters and ammunition depots. Local telegram channels initially reported the flight of unidentified, unmanned aerial vehicles, followed by a series of powerful explosions and a massive fire. There were 4 explosions. An oil depot is burning, wrote Bryansk residents on social media. According to the sources, the strike was carried out by Bobr Baklan Obrii-type drones, models HUR frequently uses for deep raids behind Russian lines. This is part of a broader effort to undermine the Russian army's logistical capabilities, the source explained. The targeted depots supplied fuel and rocket components to Russian units across several frontline sectors. Their destruction marks yet another blow to Russia's rear infrastructure. Earlier, Ukraine conducted a historical military operation, Spiderweb, changing old approaches to warfare. The mission has become a symbol of a new era of asymmetric tactics, where innovative drone systems and high-tech solutions allow a non-nuclear nation to effectively challenge a nuclear power state. Recently, Ukrainian defenders continue to carry out precise strikes on military facilities and military equipment of the enemy on the territory of the Russian Federation. On June the 27th, the Special Operations Forces, together with other components of the defense forces, carried out an operation, within the framework of which Su-34 fighters were destroyed at the Marinovka airfield in the Volgograd region, the General Staff reports. The report noted that 4 enemy aircraft were hit by fire, as well as a place for servicing and repairing aircraft. The General Staff emphasized that the Su-34 is the main aircraft of the Russian Federation's tactical aviation. The aggressor country uses these fighter bombers to attack Ukrainian army positions and strike Ukrainian populated areas. In particular, these aircraft are used by the enemy to drop guided aerial bombs. In turn, the SBU clarifies that 2 of the 4 affected Su-34s were destroyed and 2 more were damaged. The report says that long-range drones were used against enemy aircraft. It also became known that a fire broke out at the facility where the enemy carries out repairs and maintenance of aircraft. The department noted that the defense forces are continuing operations aimed at weakening the aviation capabilities of the army of the aggressor country. Military failures are not the Kremlin's biggest problem. Putin has long since lost Russia, the West, which has provided it with economic and technological progress for centuries. This opinion was voiced on the pages of the New York Times by Professor Michael Kimmage of the Catholic University of America. One of Putin's main goals in invading Ukraine in 2022 was to demonstrate the decline of the West. The Kremlin was confident that the West, as in the past, would not be united and decisive in supporting Ukraine. Putin wanted to present Russia as a resurgent geopolitical force. However, in reality, he has not only failed to capture all of Ukraine, but also suffered a geopolitical defeat. Putin's brutal war has only united Europe and finally turned it against Russia. The historian traced the links between Europe and Russia back to the 17th century. It was not so much about wars as about close economic relations that provided Russia with both military might and economic growth. Even during the Soviet era, Moscow and Europe continued to interact. However, under Putin, relations with the West began to deteriorate. The historian noted that Putin did not really want to sever ties with Europe, but wanted to regain his leadership role. If he had seized Ukraine in 2022, he could have achieved what he wanted. The West would have been forced to bow to him and reduce the size of NATO. However, in reality, Putin only united Europe and made it an adversary of Russia. Since then, Europe has been doing everything possible to reduce trade relations with Russia. The West can afford to lose Russia, but in reality, it would prefer to have a peaceful and predictable Russia at its side. For Russia itself, such a loss is a strong blow and a setback. This is Putin's choice and Russia's tragedy. Kimmage said, "Why do many Russians fail to view external threats in the same way as Putin and the Siloviki? Although Russian society lacks political agency, it does possess sufficient autonomy to evaluate much of the state's messaging. The Kremlin's capacity to shape mass attitudes falls short of what its Soviet predecessor was able to do. Socio-economic, political and cultural transformations since the USSR collapsed have shortened the state's reach into society. Today's political elites also recognize a self-interest in enabling societal autonomy. They know that the Soviet system's totalism was self-defeating and prefer burden sharing and load shedding. Russians still rely on the state, particularly if they hold public sector jobs, but much less so compared to what was the case in Soviet times. Challenging stereotypes of paternalism, close to 60% of Russians believe that the success of their long-term plans depends more on their own initiative than on state support.